Now, before we plunge into this episode, we want to give a big shout out to our wonderful sponsor, Wild Market. This is the future of online shopping and the farmers market online.
The whole process is ridiculously easy. Just go to the website, download the app, make shopping really easy.
And it's transparent. You get straight your, the producer, you're seeing who the producer is, you're buying direct. Wild Market's just bringing it to you. It is fabulous.
The market opens Friday, 5 p.m. It's a sort of bell to start shopping.
And you browse at your leisure at the weekend. Things are being added all the time over the weekend. And basically, you make up your mind and you order what you want by 12 o'clock on Wednesday. That's when the market closes. And then, of course, the food comes in and is delivered on the Friday after midday.
It's all super fresh.
And it's food, it's proper British food. And we've got the wonderful Taz coming from Wild Market to tell you how you can get your hands on a £50 credit from Wild Market.
How exciting. If you want to connect with great producers and find real pleasure in food, it's time to go wild.
And so here, and thank you to Wild Market. And if you want to go to Wild Market, it's www.wildmarket, and it is WYLDE, or get the app for your phone, which makes things even more simple. So, yes. Anyway, after the joys of Wild Market, now time to get on with this episode of Intoxicating History.
4,000 miles from England, in Kazakhstan's Tian Shan, the land of the wanderers, there are wild apple forests. One tree, Malus sieversii, is the ancestor of almost every apple on Earth. These mountains saved apples through the ice ages and sent them on a long, slow journey west, from wild genes to walled gardens, from orchard rows to the press. So when you hear the hiss of cider, remember where it began, above Almaty, the Apple Mountain, in a forest that still tastes like the first apple. So that is from one of my favourite books. It's called Cider Country by James Crowden. He's been described by the author Charles Foster as Falstaff with a handful of PhDs. So he's a writer who, with a bit of hinterland, he's lived a bit. So he spent some time in the army in Cyprus, and then he travelled all over eastern Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, northwest India. He's also a scholar who studied civil engineering at Bristol and ethnology at Magdalen College, Oxford. But he abandoned it all to become a shepherd. So he worked in Dorset, Somerset, East Devon as a shepherd, sheep shearer, forester, and cider maker.
So welcome. What an honour and joy it is to have you here, James Crowden.
No, the honour is all mine. I don't have many excuses to come up to London. This was a good one, I thought.
Well, it is, and we're such massive fans of
your books, like Cider, the Forgotten Miracle,
Yeah.
Ciderland, which I just use so much for my own book on booze history, and then Cider Country, which is just, all of them are so good.
Yeah.
And I've never met you before, but we've been corresponding for years now. So
They're all quite different, I hope.
They're all very different. Yeah. We actually met, didn't we? It was about 15 years ago with our mutual friend, a legendary figure, great Julian Templey.
So Julian Templey is the man who does the cider bus at Glastonbury,
Yes,
doesn't
yes.
he? And the man behind the
Yes,
Summers.
yes.
And he gave you your first job in cider.
Well, actually, no, sheep shearing. I was asked there to go and I was living in Shaftesbury at the time, and I was a friend of mine was bringing cider across to Shaftesbury, and I went across and I said I sheared sheep. He said, "Well, come and shear our sheep." So when he saw me shearing sheep, he said, "You can probably make cider." So I then
They're very similar,
They're
aren't
very
they?
similar. You get a hell of a thirst up when you're sheep shearing, you see. And there's some sheep shearers I know in Dorset that died now, but they would drive into a farm, test the cider, wouldn't even look at the sheep, test the cider, and the cider wasn't any good. They drive on out again.
I mean, that Borough Hill is. I mean, now as you say, Matilda's taken over, Julian's daughter, who's a wonderful lady. But it's it's what you would imagine a Somerset cider place to look like, isn't it?
Well, it is. It was a family. It's been in his family. It was a cider place before. The people that owned it before him were called Duck.
Yeah.
Tells you you're near the levels.
Yes.
But should we go back in time first? So that quote was from your book, and it's about the origins of the apple. So can you just tell us about where the apple came from?
Well, it's very interesting. The people in Kazakhstan are actually basically nomads, or they were nomads, and if you're a nomad, you can't make cider. It's so difficult. You don't have presses. You can't store the cider. If you do store it, someone else will come and nick it. So they never really made cider, which is extraordinary. They would probably make apple juice and they would dry the apples. And it was only really in about sort of 1750s, a German botanist went there called Johann Sivers, and then he came back to Berlin and died. And then it was sort of forgotten about. He said, discover this. And he was actually looking for wild rhubarb.
Of course,
as you do,
Yeah.
precisely. And actually, I found wild rhubarb in Afghanistan, which is only 500 miles further south. So obviously, you need it from time to time. And then it was forgotten about. Then somebody called Lebedor, who was an Estonian German, a lot of Germans in the Baltic, really clever, interesting people. He then went out there, came back, found the apple, realised the importance, not the full importance, but he realised it was very important. He then named the apple, which was not just one apple, but the whole range of apples there, Siversi, named after him. That's the wild, not to be confused with the crab apple that's here, which is also a wild apple. They're different. The genetics is really complex, and I'm not a geneticist. And then it was sort of half forgotten. And then an interesting, fascinating Russian geneticist called Nikolai Vavilov went out there in 1929. He'd been in Afghanistan in 1924 looking at sort of grains and things. He went there. He was only there about 24 hours or 40. I said, oh, yes, this is the right place. Bit into an apple and walked away and said, this is where the apples came from. And it is a kind of geological, it's a sort of ecological paradise in the sense that the ice ages, which were very devastating here in many ways, and then there was a sort of recovery from them. We never actually got there. So these plants had a continuous period to diversify. So it should really be called diversified.
But what's quite interesting, and as you talk about at length, is that obviously the original crab apple, we're talking, not the British one, but was very sour. And what part did the bear play in this?
The bear, yes. There have been several people who have gone out since and done a lot more work. One is Barry Juniper from Oxford. He died a few years ago. And one or two American scientists have been out there. And they were following how fruit sort of migrates. And it's not just on people's backs or carried on horse. The bear is quite a choosy beast. He can get up trees and he likes eating them. And it's bear shit. And then you've got the seeds and you whoop, bang ho, you whoopee, you've got your sort of compost there in situ.
But you were saying and arguing quite rightly that because the bear ate the apple whole,
yes,
it didn't crush down the
Precisely.
seeds, and therefore, but also picked the juiciest, sweetest apples. So really, this is this sort of self-selecting. You would be, as the bear travelled across in its crap would be the season. It would get better and better.
And the same with horses. Yes.
Yes. So you would get. So really, I mean, you see this a lot in the animal world, in the bird world with chilies. Chilies are mammals don't eat chilies because it's
too hot.
It's too hot. The birds aren't affected, and of course they fly it, and they so apples, chilies. But so this was basically moving the crab apple away from very sour, and it got sweeter over the years. Did it?
Well, yes and no. It did. For many years, people thought that was a combination of the sweet apples, which are quite large. I mean, a friend of mine who was at Long Ashton, Andrew Lee, he went out. Well, four of them went out there, three cider makers and himself in 2017. And that was, to me, it was a very important little expedition. They had to get special permission. But what they were able to show and prove, most of the previous researchers were not cider drinkers, so they didn't actually know what a cider apple should taste like or weren't addicted to tannins as these people are. Within 24 hours of their visit, they bit into several apples and realised they were cider apples. So in situ, nature was providing the tannins that you would need to make a darn good cider. So that was sort of revelatory. And now an Englishman married to a Kazakh woman, he's called Alex Thomas, I think, is actually making cider in Almaty.
Right, how exciting! So via bears and people, the apple as we know it gradually went west.
Yes, it was a much more complex. It wasn't a simple line. Stuff was going backwards and forwards the whole time. And I suspect that the high tannin apples that we use in the cider making world actually came possibly from the Basque region, came up, possibly through the Channel Islands, into the southwest. It wasn't a straight line.
So it wasn't Silkway straight, because
No.
down the Silkway. Right
Yeah.
now. So yeah.
No, but the Normans, we'll probably get on to them, but they were just jumped up Vikings who liked cider. That's why they ended up in Normandy and then thought, well, we might as well go to England, haven't we?
So before we get to the Normans, the Romans, they had, they liked an apple, didn't they?
They had pomeriums, they had extraordinary dining rooms. I would imagine it in Italy where you've got storing your apples is the main key thing. You can eat them off the tree, obviously, but they had these wonderful dining rooms where they stored the apples. So you were dining with the smell of apples around you, at the same time as they also had worship of Pomona. I think in Pompeii they've excavated an area there with a dining room like this, and they've found an orchard and a little altar, which is where they would be making offerings to Pomona, the goddess of apple cultivation, shall we say.
Yeah.
And you found, as you said, but that, Caesar found these Celtic tribes brewing. The Celts liked to drink, didn't they?
Oh, that's not just all.
Well, exactly. And they would bring a sort of proto cider from, crab apples.
Yes, I think
our
they would.
native crab
Yes,
apples. Yeah.
Although I think they possibly preferred they would sort of exchange slaves for wine. That was a bit non-PC now.
But the Romans brought. So we got the apple now into Britain.
Yeah.
The Romans brought with them. They were quite sophisticated in grafting and all that sort of thing.
Extremely. I mean, you read your Georgics and Virgil. There's actually you could almost run a whole orchard or cider empire on just the Latin from.
So the Romans made cider, did they?
Oh, they did make cider. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, I think they made it in areas. This country, it's now becoming slightly more favourable for vines, but in areas, if you're up in Adrian's Wall, you'd be hard pushed to get a good wine up there, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So you'd be thinking Newcastle Brown or.
But you need like equipment, don't you? Because grapes, you just tread them and then it turns into wine. Whereas cider requires equipment,
heavy equipment. And I don't think I've seen, stand corrected, but I don't think I've seen Roman cider making equipment. What I have seen is a strange trough, which is probably pre-Roman. I mean, they imagination, but actually a dugout canoe with a circular stone, a bit like a millstone, as you would use when you're crushing apples, just running up and down, or even pummeling it. The native mind. Has incredibly ingenious when it comes to crushing things. But it was the Normans who I think brought this the idea of the sturdy granite equipment, which was basically you need something to crush and something to press. And I think it nearly all looks exactly the same as olive crushing machinery across the whole of the Mediterranean. And some of it's still in use today. You just have a horse goes round and round. I've seen it made in Jersey like this. And in fact, I'm putting forward an idea that straw-made cider should be one of those sort of heritage items, which, as long as it's drinkable.
Yeah.
And so it's the Normans who probably brought the cider-making technique as we know it.
There was a lot of earlier stuff which we know little about, like 4th, 5th century in Brittany, St. Thilo. There were big orchards there, so the tradition had been kept alive, and bringing this sort of equipment in was definitely helped speed up the process. But as it was linked to monasteries, in the main, they controlled the presses, and therefore it was a source of income to them as well, as a source of jubilation on Fridays and things.
And when we talk about ciderland, cider country, we think of the West, don't we? Herefordshire, Somerset, Worcestershire. Is this why is it that the tree thrived there so much? Why did these become the national centres of?
Well, as you know, fashions and drink are quite important in the way they're actually marketed, and not dissimilar. I think that the cider, it seems to be a divide in the cider world between the sort of East England ciders, which don't have much tannin in, although there is an orchard, I believe, in Norfolk near Wells next to sea, which actually was planted with Somerset high tannin apples, and that would be interesting to test someday. But in the West, the cider apples were more tannin. It's almost like the Celtic seaboard. It's come up from the Basque, Normandy, Brittany, and the tannins are very important because they are they're in current nature. All sorts of plants have tannins, but actually, it's what acts as it will fend off pests in plants because it's not very nice to them. But actually, it'll preserve the apple juice, and the cider made in the east of the country, to my way of thinking, was more what I call a harvest cider. It wouldn't keep for 2 years. Therefore, it had to be drunk. It was for harvest the next year. And predominantly cider was used for paying people in kind for work, but also for lubrication when you're doing hard, rather boring work. But in the West, the cider, the tannins meant with a barrel, tannins also in the oak, you can preserve cider for a good number of years. And I've had some over 40 years old.
Wow.
Well, I think what we can move on to, we can jump ahead to the heyday of cider, which is, I think, one of the most interesting and sort of unknown parts of history, which we did touch on before, but I think we're going to learn a bit more about it. So this is when cider was going to be England's answer to wine. So can you just explain why that was?
Well, usually it depends who our neighbours are and how we get on with them. We always were at constant war with the French, and but French wines were deeply respected here. And Henry VIII had his own wine cellar in the Champagne region, not for champagne, but for flat, which they mentioned, flat white wines in Aix. So if we're at war with the French, it wasn't quite so easy. It's why the Dutch, I think, were involved with actually transporting the wines. But then sometimes we're at war with the Dutch, particularly in the Commonwealth period. We had our own civil war, which didn't help matters, although it meant the royalists had to go home and keep their heads down, which meant they had time to experiment with their cider. So there was a combination of certain things which were great. Taxation, first cider taxation was 1643 by John Pym, which actually came from Tavistock, so he ought to know better. But and then when Charles II came on the throne, he ought to have known better. Instead of abolishing the tax, he doubled it. So that to me is the heyday when it moved from. There's a marvellous quote from John Beale about Lord Scudamore, who was a very interesting man from Hereford.
And he was a central figure of this revolution,
Well,
wasn't he?
he was, because he realised, and he got a lot more from John Beale's family than he would let on. I think John Beale's father was.
So who was John Beale? John Beale was a writer and.
John Beale was a lawyer. He ended up going to Cambridge. He had a photographic memory. I think he learnt all of Ovid's Metamorphoses before he actually went to Eton, and he could scan read books instead of buying them in shops. It's a good way of wheeze, isn't it? Yeah. But he says there's this marvellous quote. His grandfather, he came from Yark Hill, which is where the brown snout comes from in Hereford. He was an early founder member of the Royal Society. He was also Vicar of Yeovil, so there's a sort of Hereford-Somerset connection, which is great. He said that Lord Scudamore turned cider from an unregarded, windy drink, fit only for clowns and day labourers, into a drink fit for kings, princes and lords.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was taking it not just into court, he was bribing people with it, his rondelets, a lovely little sort of 18-gallon barrel. You'd have a nice party with a rondelet, I think. You can sort of carry it under your arm.
And of course, he had, he was English ambassador to France, so he had tasted.
Well, this is the
ciders
crucial
normally-
thing.
yeah.
This is nobody's going to say who actually invented champagne, because it wasn't in. This is prior to any sort of claim by the French to invent it. They were experimenting, and the real sort of the sort of unknown, the sort of the silent partners were the Huguenot glassmakers. It comes down to glass, and Tom Stevenson, 1996, 98, brought this very much to our attention, talking about the Royal Society and how the vintners were adding loads of sugar and making stuff sparkle. But there's not much else in that. But I went back to the Royal Society and looked at the earlier cider ones and the relationship with John Beale. And John Evelyn wrote the book Silver, which is the first book the Royal Society ever published. But in the back is this marvellous section of these sort of aphorisms on cider, which John Beale had put together. When I went into the Royal Society, they sort of said, "Oh, nobody's looked at these for years." Didn't even maybe put white gloves on. But I was going through them and finding wonderful quotes which actually showed that they were not just experimenting, but they were succeeding.
So we're looking at sort of 1660s, and there were these men who were experimenting with making stuff fizz deliberately.
Yes.
But you've discovered that John Beale was writing about it before this
Earlier,
time.
yeah. I mean, Lord Scudamore, we don't know. I mean, I suspect his was sparkling, because you're not going to put some rough old scrumpy in front of Charles I and him to applaud it, are you?
And his were known as Van der Scudamore, weren't they?
Yes, Van der
His
Scudamore.
ciders.
Yeah, that's from the I think the Italian ambassador. You see, the word wine was used somewhat loosely. The first Whirlige's book, which is basically the sort of first marvellous treatise on cider, is actually called Vinetum Britannicum, British wine, which has a terrible reputation here now. But then it was regarded, and wine was a compliment. It was probably about the same strength. If you get a good 11% cider and 11% wine, they weren't beefing them up to 13%. And places like Gloucestershire were well known for their fantastic wines in Elizabethan times.
Really?
Oh yeah, and there was a lot.
And Wiltshire as well.
Wiltshire, yes.
Wiltshire was known as sort of Vineland or something.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. And some of
God's
these,
county.
and some of these. I sat down once with a friend of mine in Dorset, and we looked at the areas where these lanchets, or lynchets as they're called, and they're strips in the hillside, and they say they're used for ploughing. It's a hell of a job just to plough to get, but actually they were old vineyards which have been used in medieval times, I think, and the inclination's just right.
And you talk about the royal endorsement. Charles I visited Hereford, and he was presented with this red streak cider.
What is Red Streak?
Yeah.
You keep hearing that word.
Well, Red Streak is a name of an apple credited to Scudamore's crab. He had massive, thousands of acres, did Lord Scudamore, but he was also, as you mentioned before, Charles I ambassador in France. And this crunch. They would have had a very good palate. He would have known about good French wine, but he would also have known about the problems of storing it and transporting it in glass, or storing it in glass, which is the French wine bottled, we're only from taking it from the cask to the table, not for storing it age-wise, which is a crucial thing.
The glass had to be strong
Yes.
if you wanted to make it sparkle.
Yes. And he knew that by 1626 or 29. I've seen accounts, he was experimenting then when he went to London. He took rondlets, which is wooden barrels. By 1632, he was actually bottling.
So who's this?
Lord Scudamore.
So he was doing that as
He was doing as early as 1632, 31.
Right.
We've got accounts, I found by chance his domestic accounts, and he's sort of getting in lots of different bottles, and new lock for you cider house door, 1 shilling, and 6 dozen corks. He's got all the equipment you would need. He then becomes ambassador in Paris. Then there's a 4-year gap, and by 1639 he's taking bottles of cider up to London from Hereford, which means they must have been strong enough to sustain a journey.
Can you just explain sort of how you make cider sparkle and why this new glass is so important?
It's a little bit complex because you've got 3 different ways of making it sparkle. I mean, apart from adding carbonation, which is actually now so old, you could almost call it, it's over 100 years old. The real technique is method champenoise, as it then became known, or method traditional. They wouldn't have called it this. They realised that there was an extremely good way of improving cider, and they probably did it by accident. And I suspect it was done in Lord Scudamore lived at Home Lacey, which is about 3 miles south of Hereford, by putting sugar into a perfectly settled, a first primary fermentation of cider which had finished, put it in the strong bottles, put a bit of sugar in, put the cork in, and leave it. It then does its own, there'll probably be enough natural yeast there. I don't think they were actually adding extra yeast, but the first counts actually written with the amount of sugar put in. This is the crunch, is it goes through a secondary fermentation. It's not just like a pet nat or a malolactic fermentation, which is when nature, quite often the cider, particularly, it was a real problem with white wine apparently, and particularly with wines in this country, as it was in the Champagne region, was they wouldn't do a full fermentation over a winter. It was basically, they go sluggish now this time of year, and then they would pick up again when the weather got a bit warmer, say in April or May, and it would finish off that last 2 or 3%. But some people bottled it and got that fizz in there. It's called pet nat, and they were doing that with stone jars in Hereford and selling it for 4 times as much, which was brilliant. But we do know, and we got partly from the Royal Society and also from another chap called Ralph Austin, who was actually in Oxford and ran his own cider factory there in the 1650s in Queen Street, that they would put in a walnut of sugar, or sometimes Paul Neal, who made potgun cider, which meant it just flies around the house, you put in a nutmeg of sugar. And I measured this all out, and you're getting exactly the same amount of sugar that sparkling winemakers use today in there. So they perfected the method by 1650, 1660.
And then you had Digby, of course, creating this what was the French called verre anglais.
Oh, well, the Veyron, absolutely.
So we were doing all this, and the French, as usual, nicked it and took it as their own.
Well, their first champagne house with Ruinart wasn't until 1729 or something, or 1727. So there'll be lots of banging of gongs and things in a few years' time in France.
But I just think it's so interesting that you have sort of this heyday of these sort of cider lords. You have sort of Scudamore with his red streak, you have Digby with his bottle, you have the scientists, you have John Beale, John Merritt and stuff. And there's, this flowering of... So why didn't cider become, Bordeaux or Champagne or something?
I think there were several reasons. I think one was it was for the aristocrats or for the well-off. Also, they didn't want to dirty their hands with business, in the sense they didn't have to. So it was a dilettante, but they were scientifically driven by knowledge, or the pursuit of knowledge, and it's really interesting. And we can show that there are 1 or 2 marvellous quotes. Another parliamentarian who was very good was Silas Taylor. I'd love to have met him. I've met all of them actually. But just to prove the point, there is this picture here of Lord Scudamore's flute, which is in the museum here in London. It's 14 inches high and looks like a champagne flute, but
it's absolutely beautiful.
You can
I've
see it
been to
here.
see it,
We
yeah.
can show it to the camera, but it really is a sort of work of engraved beauty.
Yeah, and it's got...
Shall I take that and show? Can you see that there? It is a work of art.
And it looks just like a champagne flute, and it would be designed to show off the bubbles.
Yes,
wouldn't
and
it?
it's got an apple tree on the side. It's got his crest, and it's got Charles I's crest, and And there's one, actually, similar one in a museum in Exeter for Charles II.
Yeah.
Not as flash, but they were toasting Charles. So it was a very important social thing.
It started off as a predominantly upper class sort of hobby. Really.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just quote this because this is actually crucial. We need to know what it tasted like and whether it sparkled or not. And these two quotes from Silas Taylor, who's a most interesting man. He was a spy for Pepys as well. He says here in 1663, in a letter to the Royal Society, which I've read, "I've tasted of it 3 years old, very pleasant, though dangerously strong. The colour of it when fine is of a sparkling yellow like canary, of a good full body and oily. The taste of it like the flavour or perfume of excellent peaches, very grateful to the palate and stomach." They also thought sparkling cider would cure gonorrheas, but that's
Well, you've actually got some very smart sparkling cider, haven't
Yes.
you? Should we
take a
try
drink
that?
break.
Yeah, what I can do, just read this one
Yes.
quote first, because
Okay.
this is what we're going to hear. And talking about putting sugar in and storing it, this makes it drink quick and lively. It comes into the glass, not pale or troubled, but bright yellow with a speedy vanishing nittiness, as the vintners call it, which evaporates with a sparkling and whizzing noise.
Isn't that beautiful? Who said that?
Silas Taylor.
Right.
I called him the old clerk of his day. Old clerk
That's
thought that was
poetry.
quite
It's
good.
sheer poetry, isn't it?
Yeah, he actually wrote songs and he was a musician. He was an interesting man.
So the cider we're going to try
Should we
now.
get this bottle?
Yes, let's
Yeah.
get the bottle, and then we can go on to the revolution and cider bills and
Oh, yes,
and my favourite, people being kept in caves.
Yes.
Yes, it is. It's
But I love this language here, fretting within the bottle, mantling. There's another one, spriteful.
well, it does. Nothing changes. Good writing is good writing.
Absolutely.
But those, I mean, and ciders wouldn't keep, would they? You can, you know.
Well, you'd be surprised. They talk here. Ralph Austin has a quote which says it will keep a good many years.
Wow.
And with the Civil War, I think a lot of the Royalists had supplies of cider which were tucked down
Oh, thank you.
in wells. They would put them in wells.
Yeah.
And they
They
would
were
also,
like like in the Second World War,
yeah,
hiding the
precisely.
wine, yeah.
And they would also put them in cellars covered in sand. And what that meant was that if one bottle broke, it didn't shatter the others. And also they would have Scudamore had a rare contrived cellar with water, which was bringing in cool air. He also had an ice house.
Oh, I love.
So he could have
yeah.
done degorgement. He could have done everything. And they talk about racks in 1676 of racks with the noses facing downwards.
Oh wow!
This
So
is all
this is very
It's
sophisticated stuff.
Yes. Right.
I mean, there was sale,
so much
obviously.
material,
Oh,
yeah.
there's so. I mean, you've done 5 books on it,
Yeah.
but actually, there was sales pagan really in.
Oh, it
because
gets more and more pagan.
Well, it does because you think the Wicker Man, human sacrifice.
Oh, yes,
as well,
absolutely.
so,
Yes.
I like
Just
it.
have another glass of cider. You won't feel it.
I know, but I remember you've anyway. We'll talk about this, but you wassail, but actually, it's a marketing trick. They invite journalists down the big cider places.
But you see, Wassail was going. I mean, one of the first Wassail songs was collected. I call him C Sharp, Cecil Sharp.
Yeah.
And he was collecting one in Somerset, very close to Temperley's place, in about 1905. It was still going. I've been to 1 or 2 continuous Wassails.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, which have been going for hundreds of years.
God.
And a lot of them are reinvented, and some of them have belly dancers from
Oh, wow.
up north.
Where's Henry? Let's jump straight in.
Sorry about that. Not at all.
All this talk of whizzing bottles.
Whizzing bottles.
Right, so we're going to go straight to here. So before we hit the cider bill of 1763 and the Roots Revolution, let's do this first. So,
Yeah.
now this is no ordinary cider here. Tell us about this cider.
Well, this is actually Bolhage cider. It's made by a friend of mine called Alex Hill. We were in the same chemistry class at school together. Right.
And whereabouts in the country is this from? Herefordshire?
This is actually from Devon.
Oh, Devon, okay.
This is actually from Clay Hyden Way, which is north of sort of Wellington. And he is better known as running Vigo, which was actually supplied loads of people with cider and winemaking machinery and
Okay.
equipment. But he just played around with this as in 1989, 1990. He and Julian started the same year, and they've been doing it ever since. And it's very dry, very tannin. Not everybody's taste, but this is about as close as we can get.
Really?
well,
Okay, let's get in. Let's get in.
Let's try it.
And as we're opening it, let's open it. We can go into the cider bill of 1763.
Yeah,
'cause it
well,
gets quite interesting there.
Oh, that's a good sound.
Smoking.
Beautiful colour. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. It's round. It's got sort of
Yeah.
sharpness and very rounded and very grown up.
It's
this,
very,
isn't it?
very
Very
good,
good.
yeah.
I think grown up's a good word for it. Yes.
Well, that's a perfect moment to take a break. So welcome, Taz from Wild Market, our favourite person. What have you got for us this week?
Thanks, guys. Okay, let's start off with the main part. We've got some scones here for you.
You're allowed, as a Kiwi, you're allowed to call them scones. It's only the English
I
word.
say scones, but yeah, everyone always says
Thank
it's
you.
wrong.
Look at that.
Game of scones.
Hey, who are these from?
So these are from Hajar and James. They're in London. They actually make it with their family. So Hajar grew up in Egypt and was always smelling organic sourdough and stuff. So now she makes it
It
herself.
smells good.
Brilliant. Amazing scone.
Yeah, so I've got your triple cream, so your thick cream
wow.
for them. So this is from Kingsbridge. It's from Mary, Peter, Andrew,
Love
and Jonathan.
Kingsbridge. Proper Devon village.
So I've got some lemon curd and I've got some jam.
What sort of jam have you got?
We've just got it's a strawberry jam.
Love strawberry jam.
This is
favourite.
Roots and Wings. Where's this from? Is it?
So they're in Sussex. It's Belinda and Gary, and they actually make it like homemade themselves in the copper like pots.
Oh wow, like old Victorian style.
Yeah, and 10% of their profits actually go to children's charities. I've got some almond butter
Oh wow.
from Spain. So this is from Susanna and Daughters. They work with like small businesses in Spain with their almonds and make it all fresh and bring it over here.
Gosh.
Almonds, yep, very nice.
Honey.
I've got some honey for you. So I've got some
look at
heather
that. It's got a bit
honey.
of
Look at that.
honeycomb in it. See,
It's
when
like
you have
each-
really good honey, it's like a totally different thing
Yeah.
to supermarket honey. It just tastes of flowers and the countryside, and it's just so exciting.
Well, it's like wine.
Yeah.
You know, you taste that terroir, don't you?
Really nice.
London.
But Steve and George actually started off in Tower Bridge. They had bees in their place there, and now they take their bees all across the country. And we've got quite a few different types of theirs, and it's got different like colours and different textures because of like where it is in
And
the
different
country.
times of the year, you know, it doesn't.
Yeah.
British honey. Actually, Fortnum's have hives on the top of Fortnum and Mason. They do it. But anyway, London's a great place for honey. And then
So I've got some digestive biscuits. So I've got some sourdough, and I've also got some chocolate
oh my
ones.
God, this is tea at its best. Here. So who are these from?
So these are from Andrew. He's in Buxley, in Devon, and he grows mills and sorts all of that. It's all from an einkorn too that he does himself as an ancient einkorn.
Wow.
An ancient what?
Ancient einkorn.
So ancient grains. You know,
Oh,
that sort of-
right.
Yeah.
Grain.
Right.
Yeah, he's one of the only producers. He also does pasta. So he's one of the only producers, I think, in the UK that does grows mills and creates his own pasta and digestives.
Exciting. Einkorn.
This is all
sounds
thrilling
sounds very
stuff.
sort of
This is,
Viking,
yeah.
isn't it?
They're so good. I have them in the office all the time, and I actually
Do
have
you
to
eat quite
take
well in
them
your
away.
office?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're always doing tasters too.
Oh.
We won't put anything on the market that we haven't tried ourselves.
Excellent.
And last but not least, I've got a night and morning tea from Ben and Kerry.
Oh wow.
They're
So-
done in East Devon.
It's a real West Country theme this week, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. This is God's country, the
Yeah.
West Country. This is where I was brought up. It is obviously the best part of England.
Yeah, these guys hand pick and get all of their herbs and make it themselves. It's a regenerative farm too.
This is soothing, isn't it? This
Yeah.
one.
Oh, the night one
Lull you
will-
to sleep.
Yeah, it will
Much
knock
better
you
than a
out.
glass of whiskey.
Really?
Yeah.
Taz, yet again, you've made our day, if not our week, by bringing all this stuff with a few Spanish producers in the world. But this is showcasing the best of British. Happy, good food, good for the planet, good for our tummies, and good for happiness.
For happiness. Will you just explain to people how it all works with the Wild Market?
So on Fridays, we set up the market for you, and at 5 o'clock, we open. That will start off with most of our products, and throughout the week, we might drop in a few. So some of our producers in Devon or anywhere in the country might say, oh, I've actually got this now too. And they'll drop that in. The fish gets dropped off on a Wednesday at 7 a.m. It's just been caught on Tuesday. And then it will close at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, and it will get delivered to you by Friday, 12 o'clock.
Right. And they go to
www.wild.market, wild spelled WYLDE.
the old-fashioned spelling. I like that.
And there's an
spelling.
app as well.
Yes, and there's an app. Get the app.
Way.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Thanks again, Taz.
you.
Oh,
Hope
God
you
almighty, look at
enjoy.
this. Tea for two and two for tea.
Welcome back to Intoxicating History, brought to you by our wonderful sponsors, Wild Market.
Let's move, as we drink the cider bill of 1763.
Yes.
This was controversial to say the least, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. Government will tax you when they can.
So we're jumping
Plus ça
forward,
change, as they say.
18th century, taxes on cider, sparking all sorts of trouble. Tell us about this.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, there've been gin riots, malt riots. There were even sort of French wine riots and champagne riots, but this is actually 1763, and it does come down. France plays a part, unwittingly. The 7 Years' War, you may have studied it at school.
Yes, yes.
Cost a lot of money.
So that was like the First World War, or not the First World War, but thought of as one of the first
I think so, because
world
it was
wars.
fought in Canada, it was fought in the Caribbean, it was fought in the Far East or in India.
Yeah.
It was basically us versus the French.
As usual.
And
Whopping the frog.
we came out slightly on top, but it cost a lot of money, as all wars do. And the Prime Minister, Lord Bute, who was a Scotsman, I think he lived in Twickenham, but he didn't go out beyond the M25 into southwest England. And he decided, he obviously realised that they had taxed cider in the Civil War, and he thought, we'll tax it again. And
this is classic sort of government in the city. Nothing has changed about not thinking about in the country.
Absolutely.
Because, absolutely. Politicians are politicians.
I mean, to put it bluntly, in economic terms, the debt for the French war was £146 million, but only 137 million was found. Therefore, £4.7 million was shortfall, and they reckon they could get it back from the cider makers within a few years by taxing cider more heavily. But there were other things which were not very pleasant. The head of each household had to prepare a list of names of every member of the family over 8 years old and pay 5 shillings a person in advance. So for a family of 6, that was 42 shillings up front. It crippled them. And also the big cider makers, there was a house outside Taunton, Orchard Portman, probably the Portman family, massive orchards. And they were obviously selling the cider they came round up to London. It went across. There was what I call maritime cider, which went to the east coast of America and also to Canada. So they were being taxed ruthlessly, to their way of viewing. No real purpose apart from sort of crippling them. But there was an added element to it which really got them riled, and this was the right of the excise man to enter your home without warrant.
The warrantless search. I mean, this is against every. I mean, I suppose they can do that. No, but they need a warrant these days. I mean,
They still need a warrant.
Yeah.
And it's fundamental. And people know Pitt quite well, Pitt the Elder. Well, obviously he's passed on now. But his famous comment about, Englishman's home is his castle, but even he cobbled the phrase from somebody earlier.
So obviously this was hitting disproportionately the southwest, the cider making counties. And of course, classic, because the southwest obviously is the greatest part of England, as I was banging on about. In Gloucestershire, in Gloucestershire, an excise collector was abducted by a mob and held in a cave.
Yes.
Fantastic to prevent him from executing his duties. I mean, they were kidnapped surveyors and forced to resign their commission on the dress. The burning of the boot. What was the burning of the boot?
Now Boot was, they couldn't refer to Lord Bute.
Of course.
So all references to Jack Boot are Boot, sort of, they can't libel them. Well, they can get away with it, and the cartoons are magnificent. And there's a marvellous cartoon I've seen. A friend of mine, Elizabeth Pimlett, runs the Cider Museum in Hereford, which you must visit if you're up there.
Yeah.
And there's of a lady in a cottage pouring a piss pot on top of an excise man.
And of course, the petticoat, because apparently Bute was supposed to be having a fling with the Princess of Wales, but this is allegedly, I think. I don't think we can be sued for that sort of, scurrilous allegation.
No, it's a different princess now, yes.
So we got to this point, the cider riots, and people, a lot of people...
And they were incensed, and they hung mock executions. He was burnt, Lord Bute. Anybody with a tartan trousers was fair game as far as they were concerned.
Yeah, too bloody right.
Fair game, fair game. And of course, this sort of was a proto, or the American connection that, you say it was a dress rehearsal for the American Revolution.
Well, for French and the Americans, 1763. You see,
you're saying we got there first,
Yes.
before the French and the Americans?
Yes.
We did it better.
Well, some revolution, the revolt, but it was followed. It was so strong, the troops didn't hardly dare intervene. Same as the troops in the French wine riots. But the problem really was that Lord Bute actually skedaddled. Within 6 weeks, he was out of office. So it had its effect politically long before it actually came into effect, which is interesting.
Don't muck with the Southwest.
No,
but
precisely.
What was interesting is at this point, cider was big business, hugely popular in London, and there's a figure that Sorghum used to ship 20,000 hogsheads, about 200 litres each, to London annually, and cider was served in the Royal Navy as an anti-scurvy.
Yeah.
And then what happened? So this was on the cusp now of becoming this great, like beer, taking on beer. Industrial Revolution, then cider began to decline.
Fade away, yes. One of the most interesting things from the cider riots and the excise men was actually the excise men's records. And we have it here. It's like a doomsday almost of actually the cider makers, they're not naming them individually, but the numbers, and it goes right across the country. Even Oxford and Cambridgeshire have over 1,000 cider makers there. It was not just the southwest. Devon 20,000. Your county Gloucestershire was 7,000.
But Wiltshire, if you don't mind.
Wiltshire, sorry, I thought you were. You mentioned-
No, of course, it's far
Let's
too
look up
trendy.
Wiltshire.
Wiltshire, I'm sure they liked a bit.
No,
didn't
I'm
they?
sure Wiltshire's in there somewhere. No, there's some interesting stuff in those little valleys. Fantastic. But the demise, the problem was with the treaties with Portugal. Is it the 1703 Methuen Act? And actually, which led to a lot of wine and port coming in. There was cheaper wine coming in, and then there was basically brandy coming in from France, smuggled or otherwise. And slowly it became out of favour, apart from on the farms. It wasn't the drink of the elite anymore. It was very much the rural agricultural drink, and it was a slow decline, a very slow decline until the end of the Second World War. But this shows that I think in 1763, there were over 100,000 cider makers in the country, and there was only 6 million people here, which meant there was a cider maker for every 65 people.
And it sort of mirrors very much artisan cheese, that before the Second World War, every village, every town had its own kind of cheese.
Yeah.
And of course, with the war effort, everything was poured into block cheddar, the milk marketing board, all the rest of it, or whatever it was. But then that we'd lost our artisan cheeses. Was there a similar sort of thing during the wars that... they needed a homogenous product rather than sort of very
it was. I think
localised?
the cider making went on as it did in France and Normandy, even after the German occupation. It sort of went on, but its demise was, I think, it came after the Second War, in the sense that a lot of farmers' sons went off and did national service from 1945 to 1960. I think soldiers learnt to drink wine when they were in Italy or France, and they had 20 years, 15 years at least of national service, and they were drinking lager. What else do you do in Germany? I mean, if you're in a barracks, it's a very boring time.
Yeah, eat sausages, drink beer.
Precisely. And then Harp Lager came along, and I think that's the point in the sort of mid-20th century that things went downhill, and then other things happened behind the scenes.
I mean, there's a very interesting thing. You have, a sinister conversation. Andrew Lee from Long Ash, the Cider Research Station, have the technical director of Bulmers, obviously a big commercial cider company, about changes to the company's cider. You must never mention these things to me again. Never talk about these things. These things are closed. They are secret. You must not tell anyone what actually goes in the cider.
So what was actually going on there?
Bertram Bulmer, to Julian Tamberley, said, "You never catch me drinking my own drinks apart from Bulmer's Number 7, which is one of their earliest drinks."
So the head of Bulmers was what was he say? Say that again.
You won't catch me
yeah.
drinking my own product.
Right.
It was said with a wry smile, I'm sure, over lunchtime. But he also said, apart from Number 7, and Number 7 was made almost specifically for him towards the end. And it was, probably very similar to what we're drinking now.
Right.
It was relatively less commercial, apart from people of Hereford still remember it. But there was this, I think the sales were dropping off because people were developing different tastes. A lot of people were, not sure how to put this, but were becoming middle class. They wanted to drink wine. They were becoming slightly more affluent. The idea of association of drinking rough old scrumpy was not, that's what you did in bus shelters when you were 15. Beer has always been between 3 and 5% roughly, apart from your Belgian stuff. Cider was half the price of beer, but twice as strong, which made it very, very popular in the 1960s and 70s. And then slowly the marketing came about. The beer boys were much bigger, and they felt they had to compete at the bar with a cider that was light, less alcohol, and that's why that was their reason. Economically, probably made perfect sense that they reduced the apple concentrate. Sorry, I used to use that word very carefully.
They were trying to compete with lager, so they were trying.
I
So
think that
rather
is
than
it.
making something that is a bit is closer to wine,
Yes.
100%, or like French cider.
Yes, they went down that line.
They went
And then
down
you've got the
market.
alcopops, and then you've got the fruit ciders.
And then you've got
white
that's
ciders.
horrible fruit ciders. But then you've got Baby Sham, of course, which was
Well,
a
that's an
perry,
exception.
obviously, wasn't it?
No, Baby Sham's very interesting in some ways. It was sort of pioneered just after the war, and there were perry. I have seen it twice, not written down, but by anecdote. Quite a lot of very good perry was sent to London in the 1930s, in between the wars.
So that's
and-
pear cider.
Yes.
Right.
Well, pear cider is another way we can talk about it. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
But it was actually sent to London, relabeled and sold as champagne. It was probably better than many champagnes. And it was much cheaper. And then one it was really, that story was sort of hit on, was actually confirmed by somebody who said, Well, after the war, we went to a particular vintner's in London, well-known one, probably in St James's, and said, "Do you want our perry?" "Oh, no, we don't touch that tap." "Well, you're quite happy to have it before the war." They started out in 1950s. I think it was probably 53. It wasn't the name Babycham had its problems, but I think they got over that. But they were using
So
perry
that was
pears.
the champagne makers didn't like the word sham,
Champagne,
so
sham.
they tried to sue them.
Yeah, but I think that it's the same as there've been one or two court cases, and sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. But the early Babycham must have been brilliant because it was pure Perry pears. It must have been fantastic. But that then slowly they couldn't keep up with demand. I was reading this morning, rereading bits about Babycham, that at the peak in 1973, they were bottling 144,000 bottles an hour.
Wow.
Which tells you that it was extremely successful.
One for the ladies.
Oh yes, one. But I also did some interviews in Chard and one or two places with women who'd been working in the war, so many years ago, and they said after the war we could go into pubs with men during the war, no problem. But then when we were just one or two of us, we couldn't go into the public bar and drink with beer with the men. That was horrible. So we would go into the lounge bar and we would drink Babycham. It was about the only thing on offer that was. They felt they were moving themselves forward. It was I think a fantastic time, the 50s. Very democratic in the sense that the society was changing really quite fast, and Babycham went on, and one of the problems, it's a funny problem, but at the beginning they were taking Perry pears from Gloucestershire, and they happened to go by lorry. There was no M5, there was no Avonmouth Bridge. They would have to bump through the cobbled street to Bristol to get to Shepton Mallet, say from Tewkesbury or somewhere. And one chap said to me, the problem was we'd load 10 tons on the lorry, which was a lot in those days, and by the time it got to Shepton Mallet, it was only 5 tons on there because it all squished out on the cobbles of Bristol.
Well, I think that's exactly the right time to take a break. Welcome back to Intoxicating History, sponsored by Wild Market.
Before we get to the Renaissance, can I just tell this one story? Because I wrote something recently about cider based on James's book, and someone got in touch with me who used to work for a big cider company and said please don't tell me, don't say who the cider company was or his name, but he told me what used to go on until very recently, or maybe still goes on at big cider companies without naming any names. And he said that there was a huge shed in this cider works called the rework area, and they would bring in pallets of unsold bottles of things like White Lightning, so sort of like
Dangerous
you know 7-8% not really cider at all, apple flavored booze drink, and which had gone brown because of oxidation. And they employed people with huge electric hedge clippers to cut off the tops and then tip them into the vat. And then all these different ciders would be poured in and then reworked and then blended into the main commercial cider from this big cider company, which is, that was going on until, naming no names at all, that was going on until very recently. Amazed. So, cider reached an absolute nadir. But from there's been a bit of a revival, hasn't there?
I think just to clarify what was going on, there were two other things going on, which was pretty horrendous to my view anyway. Glucose syrup, which is maize corn starch.
Horrible. Well, so it's basically the stuff. It's the stuff that's the base of Coca-Cola and every soft
It's
drink
in Mars
in the world.
bars and a few other things.
Horrible stuff.
Anyway, that is the main sugar content. That's where the alcohol comes from. So it should really be called apple-flavoured glucose wine syrup.
And then the apples might be from concentrate from China.
Precisely, but not always. But I mean, they can concentrate perfectly good cider apples. I mean, I went online, I did say, and you can buy different cider varieties like Davenant, Yarlington Mill as pure concentrate, and then you can buy your own. Further down the website, you can buy all your fruit, so you can actually make your sort of digital cider without lifting a finger.
But again, like in this renaissance of beers, we were just drinking this great, but is the artisan cider world, I suppose. There are, it's all about terroir, it's just like wine, is it? Yep. Can you find, is there hope now for the great British cider?
Well, I think so, definitely. I mean, what is very encouraging, I'm going to say some quite rude things about some cider makers.
Like who?
What I love about the cider world is perhaps slightly, maybe the wine world's like that. Now, people can come in from any walk of life, and if they're passionate and they've got a little bit of money behind them, they can actually make something really interesting, and they'll devote their lives to it. Even if they get half a living out of it, they'll be happy.
Yeah, yeah. So who are you excited about
Yeah.
in the cider world?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I have to say, Julian Templey, they just got produced this. I mean, I remember working on their stills. I was operating these 2 Calvados stills. You know, it's quite.
He makes his Somerset brandy.
They are Calvados stills, but Julian would be furious because he went at great length and expense to take on the UM1, and it's called Somerset Cider Brandy.
Yes,
and
but that's only but that's no. He was very fond of the French, and the French are very fond of him because his French is so bad that it's wonderfully humorous. But actually, he did bring them back. There's Josephine and Fifi. Josephine is the large. We can drink some of his stuff later on. Josephine was large and reliable, and Fifi was named after the French au pair who was working at the farm at the time when I was there. And she was very sparky. She's now married with 3 children in Normandy. And there's another one called Isabelle who comes from the Domfront region. So they've got 3 stills now, and they all produce different spirits. It's absolutely extraordinary.
You know, as we said, Julian is he for me is one of the, you know, alongside you, is one of the great heroes of modern cider. Someone described it once as a mixture of Puck and Ted Hughes. You would go there, you would never ever leave sober from Borough Hill. But that cider is, I just love the Borough Hill cider. I love the Pomona.
You should come to. You've been to Appledale, haven't you?
Yeah, I came to Appledale to
with
give
your
a speech.
big breakfast.
Yes, I did, exactly. I gave a speech there. Terrifying, but there we go.
Yes.
Appledale was fantastic. Everyone gets blind drunk on the best cider. It's all the cider community coming together.
They come together.
So we're talking about the people, apart from Julian, who else are you excited about?
Well, very definitely several people in Herefordshire. I mean, my father was sent to school in Herefordshire during the war, and that's how I got owned in Hereford cider. He was at Ross-on-Wye, just south of Ross-on-Wye. There's there's Ross-on-Wye cider, which is fantastic. There's Tom Oliver.
I met Tom.
He's Tom's great. He's a great sort of passionate. He's sort of a more polite version of Julian Templey. All these cider makers have completely different side stories of their day jobs.
But it has got cider, especially in the last 20 years. It's got that it's still got that hippie-ish edge. If you're thinking about Julian and the cider bus at
Glastonbury made him a fortune.
He calls it Glastonbury, of course.
Glastonbury, yes.
And he's had it, and it used to be run because Alice, one of his daughters, is a very famous fashion designer, and you used to go there at Glastonbury, as Julian would say, and if you'd overdone it, he would let you sleep under the bus.
The bus,
huge,
yes,
and I have overdone it a few times at Glastonbury, and there'd be supermodels running the cider taps.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing.
No, it's another world all the time. But it is 6'6", you know.
Oh, well, taller than, but it is quite an alternative world, just like Glastonbury is, and like Somerset is.
Well, it is like, it's almost like Narnia. You're entering Narnia with cider. You're entering a different world.
It's like Totnes. It used to be Totnes in Devon. There used to be a sign, Totnes, and it was
Buddha Belt.
And it was twinned with some boring French town, and someone put it down, said Narnia, twinned with Narnia.
It's true, yes.
I've always loved cider. I think it's one of the great drinks of the world, and you know, with James's
when it's made well,
when it's made well,
when it's not,
it's like cat piss. But you know, it is a mirror of the history of England itself, isn't it? You know, the riots, the political instability, the government taxing us, the fight back. But what's wonderful about this is that, cider is, you know, it's back.
It's back, and so you should read James's book. You should read Cider Country,
absolutely,
and go out and find some great cider.
Yeah.
Cheers, James.
Cheers.
Thank you.
To
cider.
It's been a pleasure. To cider and the ancient makers who made it possible.
Huzzah. Intoxicating History is brought to you in association with Wild Market, the online farmers market. The show is executive produced by Melanie Jappi and Jago Lee, and is a Telltale Industries production.